Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Dwyan. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to go straight into it. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to look at this gentleman here, Robert F. Kennedy. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., let me give you a brief introduction. He is a member of the Kennedy family. In fact, he is the son of Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, the former Attorney General of the United States. And of course, he's the nephew of the former President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, who was president in 1960, between 1960 and then, of course, his assassination in 1963. The Kennedy family is a very well-known family. They've had lots of members in politics. Of course, another one of his uncles is Ted Kennedy, who was one of the longest-serving senators from Massachusetts in the Senate. Quite a powerful senator, introduced a lot of bills. And Robert F. Kennedy now is coming up, and he's very well known now, but he really came up during the pandemic time, 2020. He came out to speak against the vaccines in particular, saying that they weren't safety tested according to him. But now he has thrown his ring in, and he is running for president of the United States in 2024. Now, up until a month or so ago, he was running against Joe Biden in the Democratic Party. And as that process unfolded, we began to see, in fact, that he really was not making a lot of headway within the Democratic machine because, of course, the Democratic machine was working against him. And finally, he realized that he's not going to be very successful running against Joe Biden. So he came out, and now he's an independent. Okay, so it's only been a couple of months that he's been in the independent, but he's had a significant impact. Let me play this for you to show you what kind of impact he had.
We've talked a lot on this show about who the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. helps more, Biden or Trump. What if the answer is kind of neither? What if the candidate who gains the most from RFK's entry into the 2024 presidential race actually is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Because up until now, we've mostly talked about his role as a possible spoiler. But a stunning new poll shows that he has the potential to be much more than that. And if these numbers hold, he actually has a chance to win the presidency.
Okay, did you guys hear that? That's a big statement, right? Now, in a minute, he's going to go and do the polls. So Robert F. Kennedy is actually no longer a spoiler. Spoiler just means someone who comes in, he takes votes from one side, so he kind of spoils the race because he's taking votes away from the two big players. In this case, it would be Trump and Biden, let's say. But no longer a spoiler. The polls show that he is what? A contender. And this is very, very key and very, very important. So let's continue with this and let's see some of these poll numbers and see what he's doing. So this was about 6 or 7 days ago, right?
Now, remember this New York Times poll, right? Had everyone buzzing about Trump leading Biden in 5 of 6 key battleground states. But it also shows that in those 6 key battleground states, RFK is very much within striking distance of both Trump and Biden in a hypothetical three-way matchup. The poll has RFK at a whopping 24%, well within striking distance of both Trump and Biden. Trump currently leads the potential three-way race in the battlegrounds with 35, Biden has 33. That's not all.
Okay, I know he's saying that's not all, but this is important. So for those of you who don't know what, like you see on the top there, it says 6 battleground states. So for you guys who don't know what they're talking about, they just mean there's 6 states that were very close in the last election. In fact, in the last 2 elections, they were very close. Like the winner just won, it was a margin of maybe 3 or 4 percentage points. So it was a very, very close race. And in fact, that's where the presidential race was won. It was won in those battleground states. So in 2020, Biden was able to win 4 out of the 6 battleground states. And in 2016, Trump was able to win 5 out of the 6 battleground states. So that's very key and important. So in these very states where we know it's going to be tight going into 2024, Robert F. Kennedy is actually polling as if, he can win. He's got his numbers. Now, the numbers are he's still behind, as you can see, 24%, 35, 33. But take a look at, we only just started. This is November 2023. We still got a year to go before the actual election. So anything can happen. And also, obviously, it doesn't mean that Trump or Biden would necessarily be there, because they both have vulnerabilities, right? Trump has his legal problems, and, worst case scenario, he goes to jail, he cannot run. And then Biden, of course, has issues with, people are talking about his health. He is pretty old and that sort of thing. So you don't know what could happen between now and then. So let's assume, though, as this poll is assuming, that it is going to be Trump, Biden, and now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So that's why I was keen to see what this man felt about reparations, because we know really where Biden and Trump stand on reparations, right? But what about Robert F. Kennedy? So recently, Robert F. Kennedy came on the Earn Your Leisure podcast or YouTube channel. And actually, I really recommend the channel. It's called Earn Your Leisure. Whether you're Black in the United States or outside the United States, I think this is a very good channel if you want to find out what's going on in the Black community, particularly in the context of business, the financial markets, investing, and things like that. So I thoroughly recommend them. But anyway, Robert F. Kennedy came on to this podcast. Now, normally, the question of reparations doesn't really come up when Kennedy is making his rounds with the white platforms. But when he comes on a Black platform like this, that question comes up, because, as I want people to understand, and I've said it before, reparations is something that the majority of Black Americans support and want something done about, which is why they ask the questions, which is why they ask that particular question. So, for example, let's hear it.
What is your stance on reparations?
Yes. Boom. What's your stand on reparations? And then Ian says yes, So before we get his answer, though, let me just build a little bit of context. So first of all, the majority of white Americans, I would even say the majority of non-Black Americans, in other words, the majority of white Americans, the majority of Asian Americans, and Latino, Hispanic Americans do not support reparations. Okay? Let me just play this for you real quick so you can see. This is Republican Senator, he's the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president.
Okay, let me just stop it there. So now, I'm not going to go crazy, because this is not really about him. It's more about RFK. But I just want to show you that generally there's no non-Black Americans do not support reparations in this country. So, and this is the sort of answers that they would give,
I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate.
Okay, so, I don't agree with that, obviously. There is a way to find out who to compensate, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think it's very important to stress this, that white Americans generally don't support reparations, So what does this man Kennedy have to say? What does Kennedy have to say? So, okay, let's just play.
I understand the moral
a moral argument for reparations. I think
Sorry, he has an issue with his voice. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he had some problem with his voice, so that's why he's speaking like that. So sometimes it can get really bad, but this is not too bad.
race-based reparations are very, very obviously unconstitutional under the recent Supreme Court decision in the Harvard case.
So it's very obviously unconstitutional according to the recent decision in the Harvard case. Now, what is that case? That is the case that effectively ended affirmative action in this country. So affirmative action, something that started in the 1960s, actually during his uncle, I think, was the one that, it was during his administration, I think, that it first came about, this issue of affirmative action in 1960. And it's been going on for a long time. And in recent years, there's been a lot of backlash. A lot of whites in particular, particularly white males, have been complaining about the fact that this is not right. We shouldn't do things according to race, even though in this country, we've been doing things according to race for I don't know how many hundreds of years. And now all of a sudden it's unconstitutional because, well, let's look at the, I did want to actually go into, let me go into this, right? Cities may be debating reparations, okay? And states, California is one state that's really looking at it, but I'm kind of going off a little bit. The reparations is such a huge topic, you know, you don't really know where to start. But again, I just wanted to highlight that most Americans oppose it. And it's really most non-Black Americans, because most Black Americans support it, right? So as you can see, it turns out that the concerns of about 2/3 of Americans say they're against cash payments to the descendants of slaves. And there's something interesting here. Okay, so most people are against it, right? And then the Supreme Court decision he was talking about is this decision. As you can see, this is the Supreme Court, 9 Supreme Court justices, 6-3 decision. The court held, let's just read that Harvard University and the University of North Carolina's admissions policies violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay. And then this is the key one. The opinion explains that the Constitution does not allow admission policies that single out a particular race for either an advantage or a disadvantage. So this is the precedent that has now been set. That's why Robert F. Kennedy is now saying that when he's asked the question of reparations, well, yeah, but hey, you know, it's now unconstitutional. A precedent has been set in this case. And in fact, affirmative action is now, I believe, no longer in the United States because it is based on race, and that is deemed unconstitutional. Forget about the fact that things have been done on race for hundreds of years. And now all of a sudden that quote unquote loophole is closed and now we can't discuss things on race. Okay, let's continue with Mr. Kennedy.
You know, my approach to economic development in Black communities, I think, is more comprehensive than that, and less.
More comprehensive than slavery.
And constitutional.
I mean, and then reparations. Sorry.
I've worked for 35 years as on the board of directors of Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration, which is the oldest community development corporation. My father started it in our country in one of the poorest Black neighborhoods in America. And I watched what economic development could do to those neighborhoods. You know, one of the problems in Black neighborhoods is that there is no equity. And we have systematically stripped equity, including namely home ownership, from Black neighborhoods. By 2030, there will be essentially zero Black equity left in this country.
Okay. So he's starting to lay out all the issues that Black people face, Black people as a race face in America. And as you can see, zero equity by 2030. 2030 is right around the corner. Zero equity. So Black people as a race continue even to this day to face challenges based on the history of this country. Yet we cannot do anything about it because it's unconstitutional. Whereas we spent hundreds of years, the government implementing policies, race-based policies that disadvantage Black people. Now when it's time to do something for Black people, they say, oh, we can't do that. We can't do it based on race. Because now we have, we have this great moral authority now and all that type of thing. No, that's ridiculous. If a group of people were hurt, you only remedy that situation by addressing those group of people. Whether it's based on race, whether it's based on sexual orientation, whether it's based on so-and-so, you base it on how the injustice was done. That's how you remedy. You can't just, again, he is very different because like I said, most whites and non-Black Americans, Asians, Latinos, they don't support reparations. So here he's saying it's just not constitutional, but he's going to go on to explain that there are a lot of things that there's a great moral argument, his words, for reparations.
And that's destroying these neighborhoods. If you don't own a home, if you don't own something that you can borrow money on, you have no entree to American capitalism. You are no longer a citizen. You are now a subject. And the challenge is, those communities are redlined. It was Black communities. The entire nation, collapsed. Our real estate collapsed in 2008 because of these balloon mortgages and these exotic instruments. Well, those companies were testing those exotic instruments for a decade earlier in Black people. That was the testing zone. And those, Bed-Stuy, when I started working there, was the reason my father chose that neighborhood is it was very poor, but it had a high incident of home ownership by Black families, many who have been there from the Civil War. And so they had the opportunity to start businesses and they were very entrepreneurial. The problem is they were redlined, and my father ended that and got them access to capital. And the other problem with Black businesses is that a lot of, there's not the accrued knowledge, business knowledge in Black communities. Like my father always said, if he wanted to start a business, he'd call a friend of his from Harvard, the Harvard Business School, and say, how do you solve this problem? How do you do this accounting issue? How do you handle inventories? When do you pay for the inventories, et cetera? In a Black neighborhood, there is not that accrued knowledge, and people can't pick up the phone and get it. So one of the things we did with Bed-Stuy is we made those mentorships available to them. And when we first started working in Bed-Stuy, Fulton Street in Brooklyn, there wasn't a single open business. They were all boarded up. Today, it's a thriving community with Black-owned businesses everywhere. And the other thing we need to be doing in those communities is it's criminal what we're doing to schools, urban schools in this country. Kids are not getting educated. They're being warehoused.
Urban schools, code word for Black. You see, he's laying out all these different things that Black people face that made them, that marginalized them, that disadvantaged them, that disenfranchised them. All that is based on race. All those things were based on race. So now to sit down and say, oh, well, we can't address this issue because it's on race. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you guys tell me if that's the case. I mean, at least he's being honest. And actually, this is a lot more than what many whites and Asians, white Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans would say. They just don't support it, because they said they had, the usual arguments is, oh, I didn't have anything to do with it. It says here, why they're strongly opposed to the idea. The polling, they said the expected money would be the biggest issue. They're against cash payments. And you see right here, 3/4 or more of white adults oppose reparations, and so do a majority of Latino and Asian Americans. A large majority of Black Americans support them. Okay, there is also more support among younger people. There's a sharp political divide with overwhelming opposition from Republicans and conservatives. I already played you Mitch McConnell, the head of the Senate. So really, I say that to say that Kennedy is actually, he's going further, because he's actually saying that, hey, there's a good moral argument for it, that all these things happen. He talked about redlining. You heard him. He talked about redlining. He talked about the schools and everything. Blacks were targeted, but yet, what are we going to do, Robert? What are we going to do?
Schools. And what I see people teaching about for diversity training and all of these sort of anti-racism education and enforcement, et cetera, what you see, which is all great. But that's not going to solve the problem. What solves the problem, if you have a generation of kids who have self-confidence, who believe in themselves, who have access to capital, who are part of families that are building businesses, who own a business for themselves. I was calling,
But the thing is, self-confidence, it comes from family, upbringing, and stuff like that. And the Black family has been destroyed, has been targeted and destroyed, and I'm going to show that in later videos. I don't know. I just feel that, for me, he is talking about his experience, and his experience is very different. He's a Kennedy. He's talking about how he developed his confidence. But I mean, you were well-to-do. Your family is rich. I'm sure you didn't have to worry about food and where you're going to eat.
As a kid, there was a lot of anti-Catholic prejudice in this country, and I got called names like mackerel snatcher, et cetera.
Oh, God. The whites always do this. They always compare, oh, well, he's a Catholic, and yes, Catholics did have a tough time in this country, but gosh, I mean, you didn't have as tough a time as Black people did.
And it never bothered me. I would think, it's that person's problem. They're calling me that. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of my religion. And, I was able to feel that way.
So, Mr. Kennedy, not to cut you off, but just, I just wanted to go, because you said, so I think we did two different conversations as far as Black economic empowerment. That's important. That's kind of the basis of our whole show.
Yes.
But the question was specifically around reparations. So you said, you're anti that, and you said that, I believe you said it's unconstitutional. But were Japanese Americans not compensated for what happened to them during World War II?
Yes.
Yeah, Japanese Americans were compensated, and I think if reparations were not race-based, that, for example, if you just said, no matter what race you are, if you can trace your lineage back to slavery, you could not do reparations for Jim Crow. You can make a very strong moral case for that. And I grew up in a Jim Crow state, but you can't do race-based. You could say, okay, if I trace my lineage back to slavery and my family was, promised 40 acres and a mule, and then we got double-crossed on that you could conceivably bring that case and that it would be, that would pass constitutional muster. Do I think that case politically that you could that you could push through those kind of reparations in Congress, I think it would be a very, very heavy lift.
Okay. So at least he's being honest. He doesn't think that it can happen because it can't be pushed through Congress, but he agrees that there's a strong case for it, and there is. And on this channel, as time goes on, I'm going to be presenting that case. Okay. So, but there's a couple of things there that he said that we need to unpack. The first thing is this lineage-based reparations. You remember I showed you the video earlier of Mitch McConnell. He said, well, how do we even determine who gets it? Well, lineage-based, you know. And here I want to shout out to my boy Tariq here, you know. Let me just switch up his Twitter page there. You see with him, Tariq Nasheed came up with the term called foundational Black Americans, and he's a strong proponent of reparations, and he believes that it should be lineage based, and that's how you know who to give the reparations to. If one or two of your parents, either one or two, can trace their lineage back to the 1870 census, then boom. Now, that is why the 1870 census? Because that's the first census, you know, that's after the Civil War. That's the first census where Black Americans were actually recorded. So we have the names of people at that time. Prior to that time, of course, Blacks were considered property and they were not recorded on the census. So we have the 1870 census as the starting point. So if you can trace one or two of your parents, either one or two of your parents, to people who lived at that time, then that is definitely qualification for reparations. So I just want to big up Tariq on the coming up with that term of foundational Black Americans. I think it's very important to stress foundational Black Americans as opposed to non-FBA, Black Americans, you know. People like me, both my parents are from the Caribbean, right? One from Trinidad and one from Jamaica. Other African immigrants who come here and become naturalized in the last 5-10 years, these would be non-FBA, right? Because they don't have that lineage to the original Black people who built this country, you know? So let's go. So I don't want to make the video too long, but you know, I'm going to be talking about reparations and different points. But at least we have a white American saying that there's a strong moral case for it, and he went to lay out some of the reasons why. The other thing he talked about was, yes, there's the lineage that could satisfy who to give it to, and also you can make the argument that Black Americans were double-crossed. Remember, he used the term double-crossed. Right? And the reason why he used the term double cross, it was in reference to 40 acres and a mule, is because Black Americans were double crossed, right? During the Civil War, Black Americans got the land through Field Order 15. They got about 400,000 acres of land. It was theirs. And at the end of the Civil War, within months after the end of the Civil War, the new president, Andrew Johnson, takes that away. And only 1% of African Americans up until that point had actually claimed the land and had the land. So 99% of Black Americans saw nothing coming up from slavery. Ask yourself that question. How can you come up from slavery generations and then you have nothing? So I think this was important. I don't want to bang it up too much, but the other issue within the Black community is this: should it just be lineage based or should it be race based as well? Now, obviously, he's saying that it shouldn't be race based, and I believe Tariq Nasheed, who I talked about earlier, says that it should just be lineage based. But the problem with just lineage based is that, you know, you can have people who've been identifying as white for 3 or 4 generations find out that they have one of their ancestors were a slave. Should they get the money too? I would say no. Some people would disagree with that, but I would say no, because you've been identified as white. You've been reaping the benefits of what it means to be white. Some people call it white privilege. You know, I think the way to do it, personally, this is how I would do it to answer the question of who would get it, right? I think, first of all, the first threshold is the 2020 census. All the 40 million Black Americans who identified themselves as Black African American only, which is right there on the census forms. That is a very good start. The first door you come in to know who we give it to. And those are about 40 million people. Then after that, once we have the 40 million people, then you apply the lineage test. Okay, of those 40 million people, how many of you can trace your lineage back to the census of 1870? And that's it. Boom, end of story. You get reparations. Simple as that. And, you know, so in other words, yes, I think it should be based on race, and it should be based on not just your race per se, but how you identify yourself. On the census forms, how have you been identifying yourself? Have you been living Black in America, right? Because we know that even though slavery ended in 1865, officially, once it was ratified, it's not like everything has been cozy and rosy since then, right? So it hasn't been. So race is an important aspect in this, as far as I'm concerned. Now I'm going to end the video with my boy. Have I got everything? Yes, I think I covered everything.
In that case, big oil and defense contractors. I'm not.
Apologies for that. Let's go into this. Check this out, right?
Whether you are a Christian or a Muslim or a nationalist, we all have the same problem. They don't hang you because you're a Baptist. They hang you because you're Black.
That's right.
They don't attack me because I'm a Muslim. They attack me because I'm Black. They attack all of us for the same reason. All
That's
of
right.
us catch hell from the same enemy. We're all in the same bag, in the same boat. We suffer political oppression, economic exploitation, and social degradation. All of them from the same enemy. The government has failed us. You can't deny that. Anytime you live in the 20th century, 1964, and you walking around here singing, "We shall overcome," the government has failed.
Yes. That's my boy, man. That's a funny one, yo. Anytime you're walking around here singing, "We shall overcome," the government has failed us. Oh man, that was a good one. So yeah, folks. This is just a little taste. Reparations is a huge topic. You know, it's one of those big topics. You can't really just put it over in a 15, 20, 30-minute video. It's really got to be longer than that. And I'm going to do that in stages. But I just wanted to just say, yes, there is a white person out there who does agree that there is a strong case for reparations. Finally, we found one. There's others, which I'll highlight as time goes on as well. But there's one that I think is an important one because of the fact that he is running for president. Okay, which is very key. And not only is he running for president, he obviously has a very good chance at really making a big splash, as those poll numbers showed before. So with that, let's go back. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope everything is cool. Don't forget to subscribe and like and all those good things. I appreciate it very much. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Be good, be free, dig deep so we can rise together.